The motorcade glided through the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, just as the morning sun peeked over the rooftops of London. Wide, cobblestone paths wound beneath tall stone walls, and every surface seemed to catch a soft glow from the new day. Hush fell among the small crowd of onlookers gathered near the railings. Some held cameras above their heads, eager to catch a glimpse of the visiting president. Others simply stared, as if the sight of a foreign leader arriving at the palace could still hold the same magic as centuries of royal pageantry. Inside the motorcade, President Trump sat back in his plush leather seat. He wore a crisp suit and a bright red tie that matched the tunics of the palace guards. His expression was calm but firm. Through the tinted window, he watched lines of guards stand perfectly still. Their tall black buckskin hats rose high above their scarlet coats. Each soldier held a rifle, and each rifle gleamed in the morning light. The ceremony promised to be a grand show of tradition, and Trump seemed to appreciate every detail. As the car slowed to a stop on the parade ground, the rhythmic beats of a military band rose in the air. Trump's motorcade doors opened, and he stepped out onto the smooth pavement. Secret Service agents snapped to attention at his side, forming a protective circle. He shook hands with his own security team, offering nods of respect. Then he turned toward the British officers waiting to greet him. The officers wore dark suits with shiny brass buttons, and medals glinted on their chests. They bowed politely, their faces calm and courteous. A short line of taps clicked across the ground as Trump walked toward the center of the courtyard. The royal guard shifted ever so slightly, their movements barely noticeable to the untrained eye. Beyond them, tourists in colorful jackets and hats pressed their faces against the palace fences. Some waved small American flags, while others held British flags or cameras. A few children pointed excitedly, their parents lifting them higher so they could see. The air smelled of fresh grass from nearby gardens and the faint scent of breakfast cooking in the palace kitchens. Trump paused for a moment in front of the highest-ranking British official present. The official was a dignified man with silver hair and a carefully trimmed mustache. He held out his hand, and Trump took it firmly. Looking him in the eye, reporters called out questions from behind police barriers. "Mr. President, how do you feel about being here? Mr. President, any comments on trade talks?" Trump raised a gloved hand and offered a brief wave, but said nothing. His aides gently guided him forward, and he moved on to the next part of the ceremony. Behind him, the military band picked up speed, playing a lively march. Trump's eyes flicked to the musicians, dozens of soldiers standing in neat rows, their instruments polished to a mirror sheen. Trump smiled slightly, as if to say he appreciated their skill. He closed his eyes for just a second, letting the music fill the morning air. In that moment, the world seemed to pause. For centuries, these walls had witnessed coronations, royal weddings, and countless ceremonies. Today, they watched a head of state from across the ocean join that long line of history. As the band reached the end of its first piece, there was a brief silence. Then, without warning, Trump leaned toward his chief of security. He spoke in a low voice that only those closest to him could hear. His face held a curious mix of determination and amusement. Seconds later, the chief of security gave a slight nod and tapped another agent on the shoulder. That agent quickly walked toward the row of royal guards. Whispers rippled through the courtyard. A guard was being removed from his post. The tourists gasped, and some reporters shifted, sensing something unusual. The guard in question stood motionless, as all guards are trained to do. His bright red coat and tall hat made him as striking as a pillar of stone. Yet now he received a tap on his elbow. "Sir, you are to step aside," one of the American agents said quietly. The guard blinked once, then turned and walked back the way he had come, keeping his head high. A slight crackle of surprise passed down the line of guards. They exchanged glances behind their polished rifles, but none broke their stoic stance. Trump watched the empty space appear where the guard had stood. He nodded once, as if satisfied. The rest of the guards straightened their shoulders, though attention lay beneath their calm facadas. British protocol officers, identifiable by small lapel pins, leaned together in hushed conversation. Their eyes darted from the missing guard to the president. What had just happened? Had a centuries-old rule been broken before the ceremony even began? Stepping into position, Trump faced the assembled guards. Cameras flashed, capturing the single gap in their proud ranks. Trump raised his hand in salute, though he did not place it on his heart. His posture was firm, chest out, chin slightly raised. Then he lowered his hand and turned his back on the guards. walking toward the Grand Palace doors. He moved with a steady, purposeful stride, as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. The crowd murmured among itself. Some visitors whispered that they had witnessed a historic breach of royal etiquette. Others argued that no harm was done, that it was simply a private matter between a president and his security team. Reporters frantically typed notes and recorded video on their phones. Social media feeds began to light up as images of the missing guard spread online. Memes would no doubt follow soon, capturing the moment in dozens of creative ways. Inside a small side room of the palace, British aides hurried to review the situation. They studied security footage from cameras hidden discreetly in the courtyard. They spoke in low tones about the importance of preserving tradition and the symbolism of the guard's unbroken line. One aide tapped her pen against a folder marked State Visit Protocol. She looked out the door at the parade ground beyond, where the ceremony would soon resume. Meanwhile, Trump settled into a small chair in a waiting area. He sipped a cup of tea handed to him by a palace attendant. The tea was strong and fragrant, a perfect match for the crisp morning air outside. Trump cradled the cup in both hands. Taking a slow sip, he glanced out a nearby window, observing guards shifting slightly as they prepared for the next stage of the ceremony. He allowed himself a small smile, pleased by the controlled disruption he had orchestrated. After a moment, a British aide entered and offered a folder to the president. Inside were the official plans for the rest of the visit: meetings with ministers, a luncheon in the grand dining hall, and a walk through the palace gardens. Trump flipped through the pages, nodding occasionally. He closed the folder and handed it back. Rising from his seat, he adjusted his tie and straightened his coat, ready to continue the formalities. As Trump walked back outside, the courtyard felt charged with energy. The missing guard had returned to the sidelines, now just another bystander in his bright red tunic. The band began a new piece, softer and more reflective than the first. Trump paused for a final salute to the palace steps, where a small group of dignitaries waited. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every angle. Tourists pressed forward to catch a last glimpse of the president before he entered the palace once more. In the moments before the doors closed behind him, Trump allowed himself a brief look around. The palace seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would happen next. But for now, the ceremony had been paused only briefly. Tradition had been bent, but not broken entirely, and so the state visit moved on, carrying with it a new story, one that would be told and retold, all beginning with an unexpected command to remove a lone guard from the line. The morning light had warmed the courtyard just enough to chase away the last hints of dawn's chill. The grand parade ground lay open and orderly, its smooth stones marked by the careful footprints of generations of soldiers. A hush settled over the assembled crowd as the first notes of the guard mounting ceremony rang out. The royal guards, each dressed in the famous red tunic and towering burskin hat, stood perfectly still in a long, straight line. Their faces were impassive. They had trained for years to look like living statues, unblinking and unwavering. President Trump watched from a raised platform just behind the U.S. Secret Service detail. He had stepped back from the center of the courtyard, choosing to remain slightly apart from the formal line of handshakes and speeches. His dark suit was crisp, his posture erect, and his red tie was a bright slash of color against the soft gray of the palace stones. He surveyed the royal guards with a keen eye. He seemed to appreciate the tradition and pomp, yet there was something in his gaze, an unexpected spark, as if he were searching for just the right moment to make his own mark. On either side of him, his security team stood alert. The leader of that team was a tall, lean man with silver hair at his temples. He wore dark glasses, even though the sun had barely risen above the rooftops. At his side, several agents clutched earpieces and spoke into hidden microphones. Their eyes flicked between the guards, the crowd, and the president himself. They had orders to protect Trump at all costs. But moments earlier, they had also received a surprising instruction. It happened just as the band reached a stirring crescendo. Trump leaned forward and whispered into his chief's ear. His voice was low but firm. The chief blinked, his eyebrows rising in mild surprise. He glanced toward the line of guards, then back at Trump. The president repeated the directive, his voice calm yet undeniably commanding. Remove the guard at third from the left. I want him out of that line. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then an agent tapped the chief on the arm and murmured something into his ear. The chief gave a brief nod and turned toward one of the younger agents. You heard the orders, he whispered. The agent swallowed and squared his shoulders, then walked toward the royal guards. keeping his eyes trained on the ground so as not to startle the soldiers. The approach of an American Secret Service agent toward the Queen's Guard was almost surreal. The agent's dark suit and earpiece marked him out from the sea of scarlet and black. The tourists gasped as the agent tapped the elbow of the third guard from the left. The guard, who had been staring straight ahead, remained as motionless as a statue until he felt that gentle nudge. He blinked, then slowly turned his head toward the agent. "Sir," the agent said quietly, barely loud enough for the guard to hear. "You are to step aside, please." The guard's eyes flickered just a moment of uncertainty behind the disciplined calm. Then he turned his back to the Queen's palace, stepping away as he had been ordered. His rifle, once held firmly at his side, now swung slightly as he walked. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. Behind the agent and the lone guard, the rest of the soldiers shifted imperceptibly. Some glanced sideways, their faces showing a flicker of confusion as they tried to understand this break in centuries-old custom. The band faltered for a moment, the trumpets trailing off. A misplaced drumbeat rang out, reminding everyone that the carefully timed ceremony had been interrupted. Trump did not look surprised. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, watching the gap form in the line. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if to confirm his satisfaction. His eyes then moved over the faces of those around him, British dignitaries, palace aides, and American diplomats, all wearing expressions that ranged from shock to polite concern. Trump's private smile was quick but unmistakable. He had made his move. Suddenly, the hush in the crowd gave way to a low murmur. Cameras flashed, capturing the empty space where the guard should have stood. Tourists pointed, whispering to each other. Some tapped at their phones, eager to share the surprising image with friends back home. Reporters scrambled to record the moment, raising microphones and shouting questions that went unanswered. "Mr. President, why did you do that, sir? What prompted the removal?" But Trump remained silent, his gaze fixed on the missing guard, as if waiting for the ceremony to go on without him. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, British protocol officers were alerted to the breach. A petite woman with a clipboard and a small lapel pin denoting her official role hurried toward the group of dignitaries. She glanced at the clipboard, where she had a printed script of the planned ceremony. The words "guard mounting" were highlighted in red. Nowhere in the script did it say "remove a guard." She frowned and murmured to her colleague, whose eyes widened. The chief of protocol took a deep breath, then raised his hand in a small gesture meant to catch the attention of Trump's team. A U.S. aide approached him carefully, aware that any misstep could escalate into a diplomatic incident. The protocol chief spoke softly but firmly. "Excuse me, sir, but that guard is part of a centuries-old tradition. We cannot simply remove him." The U.S. aide nodded, though his face was polite but unreadable. He glanced back at his boss, who gave a slight shrug, as if to say the matter was already settled. The aide turned back and replied, "We appreciate the tradition, sir, but these are the president's orders." The protocol chief's jaw tightened. He stepped back, his mind racing. He knew that the guard mounting ceremony was a symbol of unity and respect between nations. To tamper with it, even in a small way, could be seen as a slight against the crown. Yet he also understood that the President of the United States carried immense diplomatic weight. He would have to find a way to continue the ceremony with minimal embarrassment. On the parade ground, the band had recovered its rhythm and began a softer piece. Trump straightened his tie and looked straight ahead, as if the missing guard was an expected part of the ceremony. The remaining soldiers stood tall, their faces blank masks once more. The crowd, now curious and murmuring, leaned forward to see what would happen next. As the music played, the guard who had been removed lingered at the edge of the formation. He stood to the side, his back to the palace gates and his eyes on the ground. He clutched his rifle, feeling its weight in his hands. He wondered what mistake he had made. Had he done something wrong during their morning practice? Had he failed to polish his boots or adjust his uniform? None of that mattered now. He had been singled out, and he did not know why. Elsewhere in the crowd, a small group of British tourists whispered among themselves. One woman said, "I have never seen anything like this. It feels disrespectful." Her friend shrugged. "Maybe it's just a joke. He probably wanted to make a statement." A man in a flat cap typed furiously on his tablet, hoping that his story would break online first. He muttered, "This is gold." Secret Service agents kept a discreet watch over the courtyard, ensuring that no one approached Trump with unexpected gifts or signs of protest. Their eyes were sharp, but even they could not hide their surprise at the command from their own president. Later, in the safety of their secure vehicles, they would talk about it in hushed tones, each with his own opinion on whether it was a brilliant move or a needless provocation. Back on the parade ground, the band's final notes faded. Trump turned slightly, acknowledging the officials who had led the ceremony. He nodded politely and allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. Cameras clicked non-stop, capturing every angle, every tiny shift in expression. Then, as if on cue, Trump began to walk toward the palace doors once more, leaving behind the gap in the line and a courtyard filled with whispered questions. The ceremony had continued, despite the unexpected command, yet the memory of that moment, the removal of a single guard, would stay with everyone present. It was a violation of protocol, a break in tradition, and a reminder that even the most solemn rituals could be bent by the will of a powerful individual. For Trump, it was a small triumph, a way to put his own stamp on a centuries-old event. For others, it was an awkward reminder of the delicate balance between respect and authority in the world of statecraft. And so the story of the missing guard began to spread, carried on the lips of tourists, diplomats, and reporters alike. It would become one of those moments that defined the visit, a simple gesture with outsized impact, proof that even the grandest ceremonies are not immune to disruption. In the days that followed, people would debate its meaning and significance. But for now, as Trump disappeared through the palace doors, the only certainty was that protocol had been broken and everyone present had witnessed the moment it happened. Checked said. Protocol officers in the palace corridors felt their hearts race as they learned about what had happened in the courtyard. The guard mounting ceremony was sacred. For centuries, it had symbolized respect and unity between the United Kingdom and every nation whose leader stood on those stones. To remove a single guard without warning was almost unthinkable. Deep within Buckingham Palace, a small group of senior aides gathered around a polished wooden desk. Papers lay strewn across its surface, diagrams of the parade ground, scripts for speeches, and schedules for the state visit. At the center sat Sir Edmund Hawkins, the King's chief protocol officer. His normally steady hands tapped nervously on a stack of documents. He had spent months preparing every moment of this visit down to the smallest detail, and now one command had undone it all. A young aide rushed in, clutching a tablet showing live security camera footage. "Sir, look," she said, breathless. On the screen, the Secret Service agent tapped the guard's elbow. The guard paused in perfect stillness, then stepped back. The image froze just as the empty space appeared among the tall, scarlet figures. Sir Edmund stared without blinking. He felt a deep sense of dread. What message did this send to the world? He pictured the newspapers, the late-night news shows, the endless commentary online. His phone buzzed with alerts from his colleagues in the Foreign Office. Each message asked the same question. What now? He rose from his chair and addressed the group in a firm voice. "We must report this immediately to the Palace Communications team. Prepare a statement. We will emphasize respect for the tradition and clarify that this action was outside our control." He paused, choosing his words with care, and arranged for the missing guard to return to his post as soon as possible. Outside the palace walls, things were unfolding at a different pace. Reporters on the lawn stared at their cameras in disbelief. Television crews shouted questions into microphones. One correspondent, her brow furrowed, said into the camera, "We have just witnessed what appears to be a direct breach of royal protocol. The president ordered the removal of a royal guard mere moments before this ceremony. Officials are scrambling to understand why." A manager from the BBC nodded to her crew. "Focus on the reactions of the crowd," he instructed. "Someone get a shot of those American diplomats huddled together. They look worried." Below them, tourists pressed against the fences, their faces a mix of excitement and confusion. One elderly man tapped his walking stick against the stone, muttering, "Never thought I'd see the day." Meanwhile, inside the temporary press center, set up in a nearby pavilion, British Foreign Office spokespeople lined up to prepare for a press conference. They practiced calm smiles and polite answers. A sign on the podium read, "Buckingham Palace Press Briefing," but no one was quite sure what they would say. Their notes simply read, "Emphasize tradition, downplay incident, express regret for any misunderstanding." Back in the courtyard, the ceremony resumed without the missing guard. Trump walked alongside the remaining guards and British officials. As though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, he raised his arm in a brief salute toward the empty space, then shook hands with the senior officer nearest to the gap. Cameras flashed again. Trump allowed himself a small nod of approval, satisfied that his surprising command had left its mark. On the other side of the platform, an American diplomat leaned close to his British counterpart. His voice was low, tense. "This is not good," he whispered. "It undermines the respect we worked so hard to build. We'll need to apologize." "But how do you apologize for something the president insists he ordered?" The British aide looked worried but managed a diplomatic smile. "We'll handle it," she replied softly. "Let me speak to my team." Minutes later, Sir Edmund Hawkins stepped onto a small dais in the press pavilion. He cleared his throat and scanned the sea of microphones. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Cameramen held their breath. Reporters lifted their notebooks. Finally, he spoke in a measured tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, earlier today, an unexpected action occurred during the guard mounting ceremony at Buckingham Palace. We understand that there was a directive to remove one of the royal guards from his post. This was not a planned part of our protocol and took all of us by surprise. The guard has since returned to his position, and the ceremony proceeded with full respect to our traditions. We thank the president and his team for their cooperation and look forward to the remainder of this historic visit." He paused, as, if waiting for questions, hands shot up, microphones extended. The first reporter shouted, "Sir Edmund, who gave the order to remove the guard? And why was the guard returned so quickly?" Sir Edmund closed his eyes briefly, as though gathering his composure. "We do not wish to assign blame," he said carefully. "Our focus is on preserving the solemnity of this ceremony. The guard has returned, and there will be no further interruptions." A hush fell, broken only by the rustle of paper as reporters scribbled his words. Then, once more, the crowd outside felt free to murmur. Smartphones recorded every word. Online, social media accounts exploded with commentary. "Royal shock," "Guardgate," and "Trump breaks tradition" trended within minutes. Inside the palace, aides watched the live broadcast with grave expressions. They exchanged worried glances. In the palace kitchens, staff paused mid-preparation of a formal luncheon. The head chef frowned at a TV mounted on the wall. "This is going to be tricky," he muttered to the sous chef. "We can't serve dinner with a foul mood in the rooms upstairs." By afternoon, global news networks had picked up the story. In Washington, the White House press briefing room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists crowded the front row, eager to hear the American response. Press Secretary Laura Jenkins stepped up to the podium. Adjusting her notes, she offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon," she began. "Yes, we are aware of the reports regarding the guard mounting ceremony at Buckingham Palace. The President appreciates the honor of this state visit and holds the United Kingdom in the highest regard. The directive issued was intended in a spirit of good-humored engagement, not disrespect. We have communicated with the palace, and the issue has been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. We look forward to continuing today's schedule." A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Jenkins, was this a planned move by the president, or an impulsive command?" She paused, choosing her words. The president is known for his spontaneous gestures. In this case, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. "We trust that our British hosts understand the president's style," another reporter pressed further. But Jenkins shifted topics to upcoming bilateral talks, and the briefing moved on. Despite the official statements, conversations continued behind closed doors. British and American aides held private meetings, reviewing the incident in greater detail. They examined every camera angle, every timing cue. They debated whether this breach of ceremony would affect trade negotiations, military cooperation, or cultural exchanges. No one could deny that it had become the defining moment of the visit thus far. In social clubs and offices, people discussed what they had seen. Some argued that Trump had deliberately shown he could bend rules. Others thought it was a light-hearted prank that had been unfairly blown out of proportion. A diplomat in Paris called it a bold assertion of power, while a scholar in Berlin labeled it an unnecessary stunt. At the end of the day, when the palace gates closed and the tourists had gone home, Buckingham Palace settled back into its quiet dignity. Guards resumed their timeless posts, rifles gleaming in the dusk light. Inside, palace staff cleaned the grand hall where tonight's banquet would be held. Silver candelabras were polished, and long tables were perfectly set. Yet beneath the calm surface, everyone knew that tradition had been tested, and protocol had been shaken. Meanwhile, back in the president's suite, Trump reviewed photos from the ceremony on a tablet. He scrolled through images of the empty space among the guards, the photographer's flashes, and the stoic faces of the soldiers. He tapped at a few favorites and sent them to his social media team. With a smiley emoji, he laid the tablet aside and picked up a cup of tea, reflecting on the day's events. He had made his mark. Protocol had been unraveled, if only briefly, and the world had watched. Later, historians would debate the long-term impact of that single act. For now, though, the memory of the missing guard would linger a small crack in centuries of ceremony, a reminder that even the most rigid traditions can shift in the face of unexpected will. And in that moment, the state visit would be forever remembered, not just for its formalities, but for the day when protocol was rewritten, if only for a brief, unforgettable instant. The moment the cameras caught the empty space among the royal guards, the world outside Buckingham Palace seemed to spin faster. News crews scrambled to their vans, rushed back to their studios, and cut into regular programming. Breaking news. One anchor called out, his voice sharp and urgent. The President of the United States has quietly removed a member of the Royal Guard. Before today's ceremony, an unprecedented breach of protocol. On social media, the story exploded. Hashtags like #GuardGate and #TrumpBreaksProtocol trended within minutes. People around the globe tapped their phones, shared the moment on Twitter and Facebook, and debated what it meant. Some called it disrespectful, others said it was a harmless stunt. But almost everyone was talking about that missing guard. In London's newspaper offices, editors gathered around conference tables piled high with fresh copies. Headlines were drafted and redrafted. The Times wrestled with a headline that read, "President disrupts historic ceremony," then changed it to "Diplomatic shock as guard is removed." The Daily Mail ran a bold banner, "Trump's court jest," while The Guardian took a more serious tone, "Tradition torn. U.S. President orders guards removal." Each paper tried to capture the right tone. Some leaned into humor, others into outrage. Photographs of the gap in the guards line filled front pages, next to images of stunned tourists and puzzled palace staff. The story was everywhere, in coffee shops, on trains, and even in schoolyards where children asked their parents what was going on. Inside the palace, the communications team worked at top speed. A small war room had been set up in one of the state apartments. Protocol officers, press secretaries, and palace aides sat in a semicircle around laptops and large screens. They watched live feeds from television channels in the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond. They read wire reports from Reuters and the Associated Press. Every few minutes, someone would call out, "That quote is wrong, edit it." Or they say it was planned. No, we must say unexpected. A junior aide furiously typed a statement meant for the palace website. Earlier today, an unforeseen action resulted in the removal of a royal guard during the guard mounting ceremony. This was not part of the planned protocol. The guard has since returned to his post, and the ceremony proceeded with full respect to tradition. The statement was sent at once to news wires around the world. Meanwhile, U.S. aides were equally busy. In the White House Situation Room, advisors huddled around a screen showing BBC World News. Some worried that the incident might harm trade talks. Others thought it might be a distraction from more important issues. Several case staffers texted UK counterparts, "Can we calm this down?" They drafted talking points emphasizing friendship and alliance. One memo read, "Emphasize that the president has the utmost respect for the crown and its traditions. Stressed that this was a light-hearted moment intended to show spontaneity, not disrespect." That memo was sent to every American ambassador in Europe, along with contacts at Downing Street and in the palace. The aim was clear: dampen the storm before it grew into a hurricane. On the streets of London, ordinary people had opinions of their own. In a small cafe near Trafalgar Square, a group of retirees sipped tea and scanned the morning papers. "I've seen many state visits," said Mrs. Clark, a former schoolteacher, "but never have I seen a guard sent away like that." Her friend Mr. Singh nodded. "It feels like someone pulled a thread out of a tapestry. You don't know where the next unravel will be." A young couple at the next table argued quietly. She thought it was funny. He thought it was rude. "He's the president," she said. "He can do what he wants. That doesn't give him the right to mock our ceremonies," he replied. Outside, tourists took selfies in front of the palace, their faces lit by curiosity and concern. In New York, talk show hosts tore into the story. One late-night comedian opened his show with a montage. "Here's President Trump telling security to remove the guard. Security thinks, 'Yes, sir,' and the guard marches off like he's late for lunch." The audience laughed as clips played on the big screen. Another host took a more solemn view, saying, "Tradition matters. Pulling a guard away is a small thing, but it sends a message. I do things my way." Viewers wrote in, sharing their own thoughts. Some praised the president for showing he was in charge. Others questioned why he would risk offending a longtime ally. The conversation reached millions, each viewer forming an opinion that added to the growing narrative. Back at the palace, the aftermath was still unfolding. Later that afternoon, as the president met with senior British ministers, the missing guard incident hung in the air like a dark cloud. A foreign minister opened the meeting with polite words of welcome, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He hoped to discuss trade agreements and security cooperation, but he couldn't help glancing at the president as if wondering when another surprise might come. Trump, however, acted as though nothing had happened. He spoke warmly, used humor, and praised the UK-US friendship. The British ministers responded with smiles and curt nods, but each greeting included a subtle lift of an eyebrow, a silent reminder that the earlier break in protocol still mattered. As the sun set over the palace gardens, the royal guard resumed its usual duties. The guard who had been removed earlier returned to the line the next morning, his place restored as though nothing had occurred. Yet the memory of his brief absence remained vivid in the minds of soldiers and officers alike. In their quarters, they spoke in low voices about the event. Some said it was disrespectful. Others said it was an odd show of power. But all agreed on one thing: they had never felt so human, so unsettled by a moment that seemed designed to test their tradition. Finally, when the president departed London for his next stop, umbrellas closed and taxis rolled in to whisk him away. The palace gates closed behind his motorcade. In the aftermath, the story continued to echo in hallways and newsrooms around the world. Some saw it as a harmless prank, a playful twist on a formal event. Others saw it as evidence of a larger shift, a sign that even the oldest traditions are vulnerable to change. And perhaps that was the lasting lesson of that April morning, that in a world of tight schedules and scripted ceremonies, a single, unexpected action could shatter the calm and force everyone to reconsider what protocol really means. The sun dipped low in the sky as the last rays of daylight filtered through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace. Inside the grand banquet hall, staff arranged long tables with gleaming silver platters and crystal glasses. Chefs draped in white coats hovered over steaming dishes of roast lamb, buttery potatoes, and fresh spring vegetables. The palace staff moved with practiced ease, as if preparing for countless dinners like this one. Yet behind the calm efficiency, many felt the weight of the morning's disruption still lingering in the air. Sir Edmund Hawkins, the king's chief protocol officer, stood by a tall window overlooking the gardens. His dark suit fitted him perfectly, though his brow was furrowed. He listened as aides flitted around him with updates. The guard had returned to his post. The palace statement was posted on its website, and the evening's news shows were replaying the incident. In clips and commentary, Sir Edmund sighed softly. He knew that ceremonies could be unpredictable, but he never expected a head of state to directly interfere with the guard mounting. The thought still felt jarring. In the same hall, the royal guard who had been removed earlier washed dishes in the servants' quarters. His crisp red coat and bearskin hat now hung in his locker. He wore a plain uniform, the one reserved for off-duty hours. He scrubbed a large metal bowl, his hand steady despite the passing hours. To him, the event felt strange, almost unreal, a day when a single command had pulled him from a sacred duty. Still, he felt no anger. He knew he was part of a living tradition, and traditions sometimes face tests. He finished cleaning and rinsed the bowl, placing it on a rack to dry before heading back to his quarters for the night. Meanwhile, President Trump's motorcade rolled through London streets toward his next destination. Inside the limousine, he reviewed messages on his phone. His aides had sent him highlights from news outlets around the world. Some called him bold and decisive, others called him disrespectful. He smiled at a few playful memes that showed an empty red coat in the palace courtyard. He tapped his finger on the screen and forwarded the images to his social media team. With a thumbs-up emoji, he felt satisfied that he had left his mark on a centuries-old ceremony. To him, letting people see he could surprise even the most rigid traditions was a small victory. Back at Buckingham Palace, a small group of dignitaries gathered for the evening reception. British ministers, ambassadors, and palace aides circled around plates of smoked salmon, canapes, and flutes of champagne. They spoke in low, polite tones. One ambassador, a tall woman with silver hair, raised her glass. "To our resilience," she said softly, "and to the strength of our alliance." The others lifted their glasses in agreement, their smiles warm but their eyes thoughtful. They had weathered a storm today, and now they were determined to show unity and grace. In the Palace Media Center, journalists worked late into the evening. One reporter edited a video package for tomorrow's broadcast. She included footage of the ceremony, the empty space among the guards, and Sir Edmund's press conference. She added voiceover explaining how the president's directive had surprised both sides. As she saved her file, she wondered what follow-up stories would emerge. Would protocol experts write about this in academic journals? Would historians debate its significance, or would it fade, like so many news stories, into the background of daily life? At the same time, ordinary Londoners talked about the incident, over dinner tables and in cafes. A teacher at a local school mentioned it to her students the next day. "Last week," she said, "you heard about that guard who stepped away during the ceremony. What do you think that taught us?" Some children said it showed that rules could be bent. Others said it reminded them that even big leaders make mistakes. The teacher smiled and said, "Maybe it shows that traditions are strong, but people can still change them." The students nodded thoughtfully, eager to learn more about history and ceremony. In Washington, opinion columns appeared in newspapers nationwide. One columnist wrote, "Whether you admire or detest the president's style, you cannot deny that he knows how to command attention. He turned a centuries-old ritual into a global headline with a simple order." Another columnist argued, "Respect for tradition is the glue that binds nations together. When a leader shows disregard for that tradition, it can open cracks in the alliance." Readers debated these views on forums and community pages. The dialogue continued long after the cameras had moved on. Inside Buckingham Palace, the following morning brought a return to routine. The royal guards marched into the courtyard at dawn, rifles swinging in time with their ceremonial steps. The guard who had been removed stood among them once more, his expression calm as ever. Tourists gathered at the fences, snapping photos and whispering excitedly. Some asked palace staff about the previous day's events. A guide simply smiled and said, "Every visit brings its own surprises." Then, pointing to the lineup of guards, he asked, "But do you notice anything different today?" The tourists peered closely, but found no gap, just a row of impeccably uniformed soldiers, solid as stone. In a quiet corner of the palace library, Sir Edmund reviewed the transcript of the press conference he had given. He highlighted phrases like "unforeseen action" and "outside our control." He made notes on how to improve future communications in case of similar incidents. He knew that no matter how carefully a ceremony was planned, a leader's whim could upend even the most detailed script. He resolved to work with palace designers to create contingency plans, to train speakers on how to respond swiftly and calmly if another tradition was disrupted. Meanwhile, on the streets, artists and cartoonists captured the event in drawings that appeared in local papers and online galleries. One sketch showed the palace courtyard with one brightly colored guard stepping away, while his comrades remained in perfect line. Another showed the president in the palace, whispering to his chief of security with a mischievous grin. Some images were humorous, others more serious, but all reflected how a single moment, just a silent, hushed order, could inspire so much creativity. For his part, President Trump moved on to other meetings and events, each marked by the same bold energy that had defined his visit. He spoke at summits, signed trade agreements, and met with business leaders. Yet journalists still asked him about the missing guard. He laughed it off, calling it a memorable moment, and said he hoped future visits would be just as exciting. His answers made headlines too, extending the story's life even further. As weeks passed, the missing guard incident became part of London's modern lore. Tourists sometimes asked their guides about it, and guides recounted the story with a blend of amusement and pride. Books on royal ceremony mentioned it as one of the few times in recent history that protocol had been breached in such a public way. Academic papers examined it as a case study on the power of symbolic acts in diplomacy. And in homes around the world, people still talked about how a single command had changed the shape of a ceremony. In the end, what remained was not a sense of shame or conflict, but a reminder of the living nature of tradition. Buckingham Palace stood as strong as ever, its walls echoing with centuries of history. The guard-mounting ceremony continued, as it had for hundreds of years before and would for hundreds more. The missing guard's brief departure, though startling in the moment, became a small but vivid chapter in the palace's ongoing story. It proved that even the most unyielding customs could bend under the weight of a human decision, only to return again, perhaps a little stronger for the test. And so, as life went on, both sides carried forward lessons learned. The British reaffirmed their commitment to protocol and prepared for any future surprises. The Americans reminded themselves of the power and risks of spontaneous gestures on the world stage. Together, they showed that alliances thrive not on unbreakable rules alone, but on mutual respect, clear communication, and the ability to weather unexpected storms. In that way, the tale of the missing guard did more than break protocol. It underscored the value of understanding, cooperation, and the enduring strength of shared tradition.